Hi, my name is Archie Larson.
And I'm Dan DeVille.
And tonight we're going to be discussing something similar that we've talked a little bit about, vulnerability. We're going to be looking at it from a different angle tonight. Tonight we're going to be looking at the impact in the workplace and just everything surrounding that.
Right.
Dan, anything you want to add as we get rolling with this?
No, it's the first time that we're really going to be discussing our workplace experiences. Now, understand that between the two of us, I think we said we had about 35 years of experience.
Oh, don't oversell it. We've got 33 years
33, I like to exaggerate. So we have 33 years of experience, and we're going to be drawing experiences from over 10 different companies. So we're not going to be specific on anything tonight because we want to be very vulnerable and honest, but understand that we are talking about a broad range of stories and information that we're going to be pulling this stuff from.
Yeah, well, let's just go ahead and hop into it. I think it's the best way to roll about it. First of all, you'll notice that we've got a lot of different words up here. We've got just words, almost like a word cloud. We've got executive, frontline leader, and frontline employee. And this just kind of represents our experiences in the workplace. And all these words that you're going to see up here actually represent different concepts that are all tied to the word vulnerability.
Yeah, how we came up with this list was we pretty much said, what are some of the words or what are some of the important concepts or principles that we think about when we think vulnerability in the workplace. So we literally just started throwing up things on this whiteboard so we would have something to talk to and to kind of remind us of the things that we were discussing.
Yeah, and I think quite frankly the best place for us to start is when we had this conversation, why was it that you feel there's a lack of vulnerability in the workplace?
So out of the many different companies that I have worked for, from my experience, all those companies have the same issue of employees not wanting to be vulnerable in the workplace. Whether it be a company culture, whether it be an ego element, whatever it is, that was a very difficult thing to do. And people, whether they realize it or not, would subconsciously rather protect their ego than sometimes do the right thing that would benefit everybody. And that was a reoccurring issue. And I've seen that everywhere.
Okay. For me, I'm going to take a little bit different approach to it. I actually think why it's lacking is straight comfort. And what I mean by that is if we think back to the industrial age and really how companies have worked since probably the late 1800s, early 1900s, probably quite frankly before that, companies are not afraid to talk about their love of customers, their love of members. I think it's great boardroom speak. I think it's nice to hear if you're looking at a quarterly report, it's nice for a rah-rah meeting. But when you get down to it, I've never actually heard anybody use the word love and talk about it outside of those settings. Like just in a one-on-one conversation, speaking about love of members, love of teammate, love of employee. We'll use cliche words like engagement, or catchy phrases that happen to be the newest thing around the block, but at the core of all of it, to me, is just the word love. Love, passion, the things that you do, and your work, the people you serve, etc., so on and so forth. So to me, there's that piece, and then I think part of it, I'm actually going to go a little bit gender on this. You've only seen the revelation of really women taking a lot of executive roles. I would say probably, and by all means, please feel free to keep us honest, I don't know, what do you think, maybe the last 20 years, 30 years?
I haven't done a lot of research, to be honest with you, so that would be kind of my general understanding from not having done research on sort of women in executive roles and when that's really kind of been culturally, at least in this country, where we've started to accept that and kind of bring that in and make honest efforts to try to diversify the leadership in corporate America.
And I think that's part of it. It's guys, and we've talked about this, I don't feel like vulnerability has been celebrated and in some ways even accepted, and you've seen that enter the work. I mean, how could it not? If it's the way that you're at home or the ways you are in other aspects of your life, it's only realistic or logical to think it's going to carry over into the workplace.
Yeah, it's not like it's a workplace issue. This is a societal issue. It's
Correct. Certainly
a cultural issue in this country, and obviously we bring it into the workplace, and it becomes a workplace issue. So this isn't, corporate America per se. It would be very incorrect to define that as a corporate America issue. It's really a cultural issue that we have in this country.
Correct. And I think circling back around now and talking about, again, that executive, that boardroom speak, you know, I have a hard time thinking that if an executive stood in front of a board, you know, when they ask them, hey, what was your plan for next quarter? We're going to love our members more, or we're going to demonstrate love for them. I have a hard time thinking that might be a hard message for somebody to feel comfortable selling or demonstrating. So I could easily see, even myself in those shoes, to your point about different companies. So in my experience, it's each company's had their own issue. But at the core and heart of it, it's always spun to that central issue for me of vulnerability.
Well, and the challenge is the companies, you know, issues along those lines are going to really reflect their leadership's issues along those lines, right?
Correct.
So it's leadership's personal issues are what gets brought into the workplace, and therefore it becomes a company cultural issue.
Correct. And, you know, again, every company's got different issues, positives, drawbacks, or opportunities. But this is just kind of how we've seen the reoccurring theme. Well, now let's look a little bit about what is that true impact. I mean, we've talked about what the lack kind of looks like, and we think some of the whys. What are the actual impacts? First, let's talk short term. In your eyes, and I don't know, we can use the board if we need to, but what are the short-term ramifications of poor vulnerability in the workplace?
Well, that's big. It depends on who we're talking about. So we are specifically talking about leadership, or are we talking about just any and every employee?
Ooh, good. You know what? Let's start leadership-wise. We're not gonna focus a ton on this executive piece. So
Okay.
I'm gonna use my hand really poorly and take that off. Thank you.
Okay. So us as employees, and then our front line leaders that are leading employees. Is that
Yeah,
kind
I
of
would put that all the
scope?
way up from like even your first level of management, past like first, if in a call center environment, first team leader, up to probably your middle management. So right before you cross over into that executive type role or corporate, so to speak, type role.
Okay.
I would say those would be the two areas where we would have the most experience, and I would say comfortably it's a little easier to speak from. This other one I can understand, we can speak to it, but I feel most people will probably get the most benefit.
All right. So you're asking what is the short-term impact
Correct.
for frontline leadership
Uh-huh.
in basically not having vulnerability or struggling with vulnerability?
Yeah, struggle having a lack of vulnerability.
Well, you know, it's interesting because that has huge ramifications, especially in big corporate environments. They really require you to work together. You've got to work together. When you work for a Fortune 500 company or you work for any big company, these big companies are divided up into variety, you know, several segments or lines of business or certain elements. And these elements all have to work together to create the overall brand. The overall brand that's seen and understood by the customer, by the paying customer, as well as the corporate culture. The challenge is when you work with people, especially lots of people, you are working in a very diversified environment with lots of opinions, expression, and of course all the work that we've done culturally to add more diversity into the workplace. You have different, you know, elements, different beliefs, different systems, all sorts of different thoughts and ideas coming into the workplace. And you have to work with everybody. You have to. You, in a large corporate environment, cannot be successful on your own. It is not a siloed environment, period. No matter what you think, you are not siloed. And so when you refuse to be vulnerable, you are essentially putting up barriers or you're putting up walls that prevent other people from feeling that they can communicate with you or that they can work with you. When that happens, that can create everything from apathy to anger to, honestly, even sabotage. Back talking, just all kinds of things can happen. And whenever we have these types of things that happen, and as they start to compound, we then create toxic work environments, right? And in fact, it's so much of an issue, or these things do happen, that big companies especially, they have, you know, HR groups that it's their job to make sure that toxic environments aren't created, that things are fair, and that people are able to kind of work together. So there's definitely ramifications to that, and it definitely has an impact on not only people and morale, but the bottom line.
Well, let's look at that then, because I think we're starting to lens out a little bit too much.
Okay.
Let's put down some of the short-term things. So if you
Okay.
think about it from a perspective, I'm going to hand it to you now because you started. with us. Short-term impacts from your perspective.
So just really quick, simple thoughts.
Just
Okay.
short-term impacts.
So
What do you see as
short-term
an
impacts.
impact from this.
Morale, engagement, money, bottom line, right? So those are three right there that just hit me immediately.
Okay. I'll take it a step further.
Okay.
Attrition.
Okay.
And for those of you guys that might not know what attrition is, that's just basically employees either staying employed at the same company or choosing to move on, whether that's voluntary or involuntary, to a different company / different position.
I don't have my spell check on everybody, so.
Yeah, you may want to have me spell. I'm just kidding. Attrition. I think you've already called out engagement, morale, job satisfaction.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
Results. And I think that some of these can cross over, right?
Sure.
Certainly over to that long term.
Sure.
I don't know how to put it, but I guess the best way of thinking in my mind is we have a tendency of running a lot of, we call it engagement, but a lot of like games, things almost like we have a tendency of throwing money at the problem. Like, oh, we've got a problem with engagement. Let's throw money at the problem. That's what I've historically seen.
Right. I've seen that over and over and over across so many different companies where that becomes the issue. Well, let's run a contest, or let's throw a party, or let's get some swag. All those things are wonderful things, but they don't address the core of the issue. And at the end of the day, if you're not addressing the core of the issue, you're really just giving away things, right? You're just throwing money away.
Well, I would agree with that. And that's terrible. Let's go along. Oh, that's not much better. Jeez Louise.
Use the blue, man. Use something that they can see.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Well, we don't always know blue is better than red anyways, so. There we go. Let's talk about the long term as well, because I have a feeling we're gonna get some synergy between those two. And I'll have you use the black marker. You're probably a little bit better penman than I am. I would say
I'm a hell of a lot better penman.
I think we see really the same problems: morale, engagement. Do you want to draw an arrow to it, or how do we want to put moving them from the short term into that long term bucket? Does that make sense?
I guess I'm not sure where you're going
Here,
with that.
so what my thought is like these are short term problems. Like they also are under here into the long term.
They're all long term. Every single one goes
Like,
to that.
Yeah.
And in fact, it builds on it, is what it does.
And the one thing that I don't think is called out here, and I didn't feel comfortable putting it in the short-term area, I certainly think it goes there, is ultimately it's trust.
Yeah.
When you think about a lack of vulnerability, I can't tell you how many meetings and places, dude, I'm gonna let you write, I know better. People just don't have that trust, and that goes back to what you talked about, I don't think people realize the only thing worse than somebody hating somebody is what you'd actually mentioned with them being apathetic.
Yes.
To it, not caring
Yep.
about what happens to a peer, a member, results. Once you hit there, to me, you've actually crossed over, especially if it becomes a long-term problem, you're really starting to get to a tipping point where if it goes too long, it makes it really hard to go back the other direction.
Well, and the challenge with trust too is it's not a static element, right? So
Yeah.
you're either gaining it or you're losing it.
Yeah.
You cannot stand still with trust. Not addressing an issue means that you are losing trust because everybody sees that. The challenge with vulnerability and the big lie with vulnerability, and I think this is a big piece to this, is we often don't want to be vulnerable because we don't want to expose our weaknesses. But by not being vulnerable, we are exposing our weaknesses, especially in leadership, because you see these elements start to decline. And so you're not hiding it from anybody. All you're doing is you're avoiding it, and you're letting everybody else draw their own conclusions as to what's happening and what the problems are.
Well, that actually goes back to one of my favorite sayings you have, which is
What you don't know,
you make up.
And what you make up, especially in leadership, will work against you.
You know, it's interesting.
Or what you're only, let me say that again. What you don't tell your employees, they make up. And what they make up will work against you in a leadership position. That is a huge challenge Because I know in leadership positions, you often have information that's like sensitive, and there's time release dates, and you have to be careful, right? So I don't say that flippantly. There obviously is the right time to say things, and there's times to wait to say things. But often we'll work really hard to be so careful that will allow the rumor mill to start working by itself. And by not saying anything, we allow the employees or the people that work for us make up or create what's going on. And that is usually very damaging.
Well, it's where chaos reigns. You know, that's where structure begins to be replaced with chaos because of the lack of knowing and feeling comfortable. Gets replaced with anxiety, with fear, a variety of other emotions, none of which have a positive connotation to it at all. And really, this actually reminds me of one of my first experiences with myself having a lack of vulnerability. And I actually relate it back to the first time I had somebody that got emotional with me. I wasn't expecting it. I had had no training on how to handle it when somebody begins to get emotional with you. Myself, while I'm an emotional being and I believe everyone has an element of emotion to them, I hadn't tapped into mine at that point. And I started giving feedback to somebody, they just started breaking down and crying. Like the lip starts quivering, you know, the eyes start going back and forth. And I remember just this overwhelming sense of like, one, I have to stay in control. Secondly, what do I think about? Man, how do I like comfort? Like I've got all these things going through when really all those thoughts could be boiled into one concept. Like, how can I help make them feel comfortable and help them share whatever it is that's causing this? And it took me like, 3 hours? Not in that day, but broken up over sessions, because I actually had to go to my manager and I asked questions 3 different times before I felt comfortable enough and finally got the answer. But even still, looking back, it was a poor reaction. I just remember just patting their chairs like, there. Because I know, hey, there's like, you gotta be careful, but like, I got somebody crying, and I got people watching, and do I have tissues right? Oh, I don't have tissues right here, so they're like, you know, they're having to wipe their face on their sweat. I mean, it was a terrible situation for them. And I just remember thinking like, oh, this is embarrassing. Like, how do I also avoid this? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm new to my role, I'm newer, how does this look? I'm having thoughts that, quite frankly, I really shouldn't have had in that moment. And it goes back to what we talked about, the ego. Mm-hmm. Luckily for me, that was short-term. And what I mean by short-term is I only stayed in that leadership model for probably 5 to 6 years, you know, before I recognized there was a better way, which is sad. But how many of us never get to the place where we can be that vulnerable?
So when we say ego and vulnerability, how are we defining that?
To me, ego it's really the who you are in that self-esteem. Now, it could be a positive ego, because I believe self-esteem comes from a positive ego. But again, there's a tipping point. When in a situation when someone else is in an uncomfortable spot, where does your first thought go to? Is it them or you? To me, if my first thought goes to them, I'm still in a positive ego place. As soon as I've switched that, and I'm now more worried about how I'm looked at, how I'm perceived, what's going on with people watching me, now I've crossed over into the place where it's not a positive as a leader. Because ultimately, my job is to service and to take care of that person that's sitting in front of me, not in that moment me.
Sure. You know, I would agree with you. I think our ego is really made up or defined by certain key elements in our lives. Our own personal value systems, how we were raised, our culture and our cultural expectations, our gender and our gender expectations, our job title and our job title expectations. There's all these preset definitions that come with who you say that you are and what you claim to be. And what I have learned very clearly is we have to be okay. We often feel that we want to stay protected or shielded within each one of those defined roles. We don't want to feel anything other than we're safe, we're good at what we do. And whenever something challenges that, right, or brings that into question, or we perceive that it's bringing it into question, suddenly we get a rush or a wave of emotion that makes us feel uncomfortable. The key is this: ego and lack of vulnerability is rebuffing that feeling and usually converting it into anger or blame or something else to deflect it back onto something else so that we don't have to engage with our feelings. Whereas vulnerability is the art of embracing those feelings. And I know that's hard, but feeling weak or out of control or whatever it is, and actually working through those feelings to determine what is legitimate feedback, what is improvement oriented, and what is just hogwash and just not applicable, and what's really trying to be said versus what is our brain and our fears and our desires trying to tell us. So the idea of vulnerability is embracing the feeling, and that's the challenge. Brene Brown refers to it as the rumble. And so when the problem comes, it's how you're going to engage. Are you going to embrace it, knowing that you're going to be uncomfortable, and roll through it to come out stronger on the other end, which is defined as courage? Or are you going to be fearful and cowardly and deflect it onto something else? And it's really interesting because for the first time I put together, being cowardly is being egotistical, and being cowardly is the person that won't address it. So that's me blaming and shaming and doing all those other terrible things, right? That's the coward. The hero or heroine, or the person that is embracing that and willing to go through that uncomfortable element, no matter what happens, that's the hero. And it's interesting because we revere that in movies and books and stories. Those are the characters that we go out and we look forward to going to go see at the theater, right? Or in our favorite stories. And yet our culture and our society elements will come in and will protect the ego, and whether we're conscious of it or not, we'll do just the opposite, and we'll make sure that we're not in that position.
Well, I think you bring up a great point. Why is it popular in Hollywood? I mean, there's several movies that are out. Just recently, there was the most recent Avengers. Why are those movies so popular? Well, one, it's storytelling. You know, they follow the arc,
The
the
hero's
journey. But secondly, I think people really love to be inspired and aspired and want to feel like they can be that person. And I don't think the challenge is they don't want to be the person. I don't think, one, they know how or the steps to take. But as you had mentioned, it's not comfortable.
No, it's not.
To sit in front of somebody and own your stuff is not a comfortable feeling at first. But the weird part is the longer it goes, it actually becomes more calming, more peaceful, easier to deal with, easier to see clearly and with clarity, and all those things.
Well, what you learn is, honestly, and it's epic, but being vulnerable and learning to embrace your vulnerability and embrace that courageously, that's actually the key element in your pursuit of happiness and actually achieving happiness. When you own who you are and you're saying, this is me, this is who I am, and that's not from an arrogant standpoint, right? But it's from a standpoint of saying, I am willing to step in and really be my complete me. Not what society tells me, not what my culture tells me, not what my gender is telling me, but I'm embracing who I am, what my subconscious desires are, and that's what I put out there. That's when you're truly you, and that is that path to happiness.
Well, it's interesting, and actually, what you just said made me reflect on a movie that was out several years ago, Coach Carter, when he keeps asking the kid, you know, what's your greatest fear? What's your greatest fear? And he comes back with one of the most powerful lines, and I'll go through part of it, but I'm butchered if I tried the whole thing. But basically, the kid comes back, and you know, it's like a high school age kid, and says, my greatest fear is that I'm inadequate. And that's just it. I think that's most people's greatest fear, is if they showed who they truly were, they fear that the world would reject that version of themselves, and they don't know what they would do with it.
Right.
And I mean, I can only speak from personal experience, and it took me years to get there. And I can comfortably say that would be where I was at in most of my 20s, certainly in my teenage years, most all of my 20s. And I really feel like I started coming into my own in those early 30s and shaping a lot of that ego and id and just making sure the vulnerability, like I said, that's been a more recent journey.
And that's because we're tribal, right? We're tribal by nature, so we want to belong. We want to be in a group, and being rejected by that group, or at least perceive that we're rejected by that group, can be devastating. Can be one of the most difficult things that people deal with.
Well, I think this is what now let's tie it back into that long term we talked about. When you go for so long with low morale, because you can't share, and you can't openly and candidly share with your boss, long term, what does that do to somebody?
Well, it destroys them, and in a business setting, it creates, or it can create, a dog-eat-dog environment, right? To each his own. You throw everybody under the bus at all costs. You protect you. And we're protecting our egos. We're not protecting the interests of the business. And that's where the difficulty comes in. So it can be extremely detrimental.
Well, engagement. I mean, you go right down the list. Engagement. Who wants to engage when the environment's negative?
Yeah.
Well, certainly positive people don't want to engage because you don't like to be the outspoken, minority. You don't want to be in the minority of that when everybody else is being negative. I know I don't. I'll actually choose. Going back to Brene Brown, puff up, shrink down. I shrink down when that happens typically. I'm like, look, I'm just not going to deal with it. I'll do I'll be me.
Yep.
And I'll be me quietly or somewhere else.
Yep. I do the same thing. I'll just walk away.
Yeah, it's just not worth it. I'm not going to.
I'm out. I don't care what happens. Yep.
Money. I can't tell you how much money I've seen this cost companies.
Yeah.
I've seen people that just don't want to do their jobs effectively, waste time in one way or another, work hard to not do their job, decide to leave talented people because they're like, I don't want to deal with this. I'll go find somewhere else that'll compensate me just as well, if not better. Which, I guess, ironically takes us to the attrition piece. Well, why do most people leave? Just in case you guys wonder why most people leave their jobs, it is not the company that they are leaving. Culturally, yes, it is the company that they are leaving. There has been a culture of, as Dan and I feel, really it's the vulnerability. They leave their manager typically, and it's because they don't.
Yeah, they leave their leaders.
Yeah, they don't feel like their leader. They can be open, honest, candid, direct with. Like they share enough, they care enough, they love enough. And when that doesn't happen, let's be honest. Do you want to be there? I don't.
No. Well, and the key piece is, in order for companies to be profitable and successful and to be able to compete in the workplace, they have to be creative, inventive. You have to be highly engaged to be in creative, inventive, and in artistic spaces. You have to be the best of you to create. And what these type of environments do is they do just the opposite. They destroy creation because people don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to be vulnerable. And then what happens is just the opposite happens. So we don't become creative. We don't engage. We just be stale. We just punch in, punch out.
We give
and just go through the motions. And you cannot succeed in an environment like ours, in a free marketplace, and just go through the motions. You will not be successful.
Well, I think Gary Vaynerchuk says it well when he says, you do you. To truly be able to live your story, as Brene Brown says, and step into the full self you can be and live your whole life, and be whole living, you have to do you. I can't be you. And I tried it. I mean, it was fun that one night we did the video, but you remember what I told you afterwards?
You got to give them the context.
So Dan and I did a video where
we were making fun of each other.
Yeah, I pretended to be Dan.
And I pretended to be Archie.
And let me tell you, to get psyched up enough to come with the intensity level Dan brings, I actually had to exercise. I went up, did jumping jacks, a whole host for probably like 5 minutes. I got done and I was energized, I was jazzed. I was going through it, I get done. And I turned to look at him and I go, that was exhausting.
Yeah.
I'm done. And I'm a pretty high energy person. I mean, I don't think of myself as like, but man, it brought a whole new level of respect for just the way Dan is and like what he goes through day to day. Caffeine or not, who he is a challenging person to replicate. And I learned that firsthand.
One time I was doing a presentation on stage with a pretty big audience. And I remember when I started, I went through, and this presentation was about a 50-minute presentation. And after that was over, I came off a stage and one of the audience members came up to me and said, you know what, Dan? He said, when I sat down, I watched you and I said, you won't last 5 minutes at that pace. And he said, I was blown away that you went the whole 50. So it's kind of funny that you said that. But yeah, I put out a lot of output, I guess.
Yeah, you definitely do. But again, that's how you show up. Mm-hmm. That's your engagement. That's how you are satisfied, really.
Right.
That's just you. That's how
if you take that away from me, flat.
Yeah.
Flat.
Meanwhile,
Like if you say, you can't do that, or if you shamed me, for example, you're too loud, we don't want that, right? You need to tone it down, you need to do this and this, that would slowly erode my effectiveness to be able to communicate a message.
No, I agree. Now, let's talk about the it's not hidden component. Because I think one of the things people think about with vulnerability in the workplace is, oh, you know what? I'll put it on autopilot. Nobody will know the difference. Yep. And we had a pretty candid conversation about that. I'll just be frank with it. That's bullshit. Like, you can't just check out and pretend like you're going through the motions and nobody's going to pay attention. Because quite frankly, if that is the case, you're not making an impact. And I would challenge how much you've been engaged from day one. Because people should always know when you're there. When you're not.
You know, I think about it like this, and I think this is a really good way to kind of look at the workplace and in terms of what kind of engagement that you have in your workplace. Just like, and I think of it in terms of a sporting event, okay? You're either a player or you're a fan. You're an audience member, right? So you're either in the arena engaging and trying to problem solve, or you're a spectator on the outside heckling, jeering, cheering, whatever it is. You're one of two elements. And it's interesting because the vulnerability component, the people that are vulnerable are those that are stepping into the arena and they're in the game, they're playing, despite what's going on around them. And the people that are disengaged are usually the ones that are on the outskirts that offer all kinds of, I don't know what we want to call it, but...
distrustful engagement.
And I'm going to call it quality feedback, all right? Feedback's important. I know that we embrace feedback. You got to have it. But in my opinion, there's 3 types of feedback, okay? There's feedback that's for the good of the company or the good of the goals and what's going on. And i.e., I need to be reminded because whatever I'm doing maybe has opportunity to improve what I'm doing for the company. There's then my personal feedback, meaning that, Dan, you can deliver that message cleaner. Remember your audience. There's opportunity here to make sure that you are delivering the message in a better way, or you're doing things that incorporates the overall goal and the whole better. And that also is appropriate feedback. But the feedback that you've got to really be careful is the feedback that is shame trigger feedback. I call it chicken shit feedback. It's the stuff where people are very
passive-aggressive?
Passive-aggressive. They're going to always tell you what you need to fix, but they'll never be specific, right? Or they'll never really engage in the problem, but tell you how everything that you're doing is incorrect, right? And those are the conversations where if you ever want to cut through that and find out if this is valid feedback, start asking real specific questions. The more specific you get, and they can't address that, it starts to delegitimize what you're hearing. And I'm telling you, I've had to learn how to get good at that because depending on what you do and your corporate environment and what's currently going on, it's amazing how many people out there, especially if you're in the arena, for whatever reason, will look for opportunities to tear you down, to pull it back, to rein you in, right? To not allow you to fully engage. And it's interesting because I think it was Aristotle that said, if you don't want, and this won't be exact, but it went something along the lines of this. If you never want to be criticized, don't say anything, don't do anything, and don't address anything. So if you don't want criticism, don't do anything, and you'll avoid that. If you want to engage or get involved into the arena in any way, shape, or form, expect it. It's gonna happen. People are gonna come after you. On the flip side, people are also gonna support you. And so you have to make sure that you're looking at both sides of that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I think I located through what you were saying 3 types of feedback, really. And keep me honest with this.
Okay.
Company or cultural feedback.
Which is appropriate.
Personal / development / personal growth.
Which is
That's
appropriate.
the second one. And then I would actually label that third one false feedback.
Okay.
It's there, it's present, but I really like what you said. The more I ask questions, you can really figure out like where that truth is at, and I like to say hold the mirror up. What's honest, what hits the mark, where they're probably right, and what's probably not accurate or feedback you feel is legitimate feedback. So I would agree with that part to it. We've got a lot of stuff up here, and I think we've got some topics and some things that we can really dive into. Just so you guys know, each one of these represents a different concept that ties into the overall concept of vulnerability. If you're all right, do you have one you're more passionate about that we can start with? I mean, there's a lot up here.
Well, why don't we just start with your death spiral?
Oh, man.
And we don't have to do all of them, right? We can just pick.
We can pick a few here.
ones.
Listen, I'm going to erase this.
Yeah, take it.
I'll leave this employee piece up.
Okay.
But I'll tell you that this one's I'm pretty passionate about. It came later in my career, but some things became very apparent to me as I worked with, rather it was directors at other companies or frontline employees, other peer leaders. Really, when we're talking about performance, there's an ideal performance environment to create for someone. And once it starts triggering in the wrong direction, that's why I call it a death spiral, it quickly speeds up and accelerates. It's kind of like a drill going into the ground. It takes a minute to take hold, but when things get reversed, if you're not a confident, vulnerable leader, stuff falls apart pretty quick.
Yeah.
And here's how. Performance slips, which causes anxiety and stress, which causes more performance to slip, which causes more anxiety, which causes more performance to slip, which causes more anxiety, which causes more performance to slip, which causes more, and it keeps going. Now here's the trick. Once it starts, you're just kind of a little bit at risk, but the further you go down and you don't get that reverse, leaders become less confident in themselves. And that lack of vulnerability, toward, no, I gotta have the answer. These folks aren't stupid. They can sense when somebody doesn't believe what they're dishing out. And what it causes is, and this is the line I'm gonna write, problems outside of the workplace, which then drives more stress, anxiety, results that are poor. And it just keeps going until ultimately you reach a threshold you don't come back from. And that to me is what I call the death spiral. If you don't have vulnerability and you can't lead by example, that's what happens.
Well, and the thing is people know it too. So
yeah. Let's let you go through one of yours now.
Well, you've got, there's my favorite, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, results, which that's psychology 101. And the basic concept is you've got thoughts lead to feelings. Okay? So obviously, we can start introducing concepts, any controversial concept I could start throwing out there right now, and I can start generating feelings within this audience right here, either one way or the other. So by feeding thoughts into you, I can help to generate feelings. Feelings will drive behaviors, and behaviors always equal results. And it's important to remember that thoughts drive feelings, but feelings can also drive thoughts. And this goes back to what employees or what people don't know they make up. And what they make up will usually work against a leader. So if I'm not there to help reassure the people that I'm leading about what's going on and how this is in their best interest and how I'm working in their best interest, and they're being forced to stretch or to get out of their comfort zone, when you're out of your comfort zone, that creates pain. Pain hurts. And if you don't understand the purpose of pain, because nobody's talking to you about it through thoughts and through having conversations, you're going to generate negative feelings. Negative feelings without any context creates negative thoughts. negative thoughts and negative feelings create negative behaviors, i.e. lack of engagement, i.e. these other types of things which start to impact and give you negative results. And so when this is going on, it's imperative that the leader come in and start to address with vulnerability and context and guidance and a plan. And if they start to do that, they can start to generate additional positive thoughts. You take these negatives and turn them into positives. Suddenly these negative feelings start turning into positives.
Oh, let's see that marker here in a
Behaviors,
second.
results.
Dude, you're right in my wheelhouse now. You got me going now. All right, so now we're going to go to one of my concepts.
You know, racist, you want the
Actually,
space?
erase everything but the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and results. I'm going to now, so now we've talked about death spiral. I'm going to use blue over here. So we've got death spiral, we've talked about. Dan, you've talked about thoughts, feelings. I'm going to skip over to the doggy paddling. And I'm going to talk about doggy paddling to success. Because what you just said led perfectly into it. One of the big falsities I've seen with performance, and as Dan mentions, leadership vulnerability. Here, I'm going to switch spots with you, if you don't mind. And where we've really done, in a lot of instances, as leaders, a disservice to our people is what Dan just talked about. And specifically, usually in the environments that we've worked in, we're driving one of two things. And it's usually either efficiency or satisfaction. And the challenge that I've usually seen people run into is, as somebody's satisfaction goes up, what we've historically seen is usually what happens to their efficiency.
Tends to go down.
It goes down because they're focusing on this.
The more time you spend with people, the more time that takes, which gives you the opportunity to help create a better satisfied experience, but can come at the cost of efficiency.
And you just perfectly let in, because here's what happens. I'll lay it out. Employee starts working on something that a leader told them to work on. Maybe customer satisfaction. They're super focused on it. As Dan called out, now they're not as efficient on the calls because they may be trying new things. And as a leader, our tendency, instead of recognizing, hey, you're trying something new, you're changing your behavior and influencing right here, instead, we fall victim to, you're not as efficient now. So we start talking about efficiency versus reinforcing the positive change in behavior, which now drives a frustrated employee because they're like, well, I was trying what we talked about, and because now they're not confident, now they don't start focusing on this, and they start focusing on this. And really all that it leads is, then you switch which conversation you have as a leader. Oh, well, now I'm going to focus again on satisfaction. They're not following what I listened to. And all that follows and causes is neutral at best results. The reason why I call it doggy paddling to success is what Dan talked about is actually the most crucial component to this. As you're working with somebody, I don't care if it's satisfaction, efficiency, how to tie your shoes, how to make a sandwich, the concept is the same. If I'm teaching you to do something and you are trying to do it and changing your behavior, I need to flood you with positivity and encouragement and tell you, you're the man, way to go, way to be, way to try something different, do something different. Because the definition of insanity is what, Dan?
Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result.
Thank you. So what's going to happen is their efficiency is still going to go down. But instead of calling them out on it and calling them a terrible person and that they need to correct their behavior, I reinforce, I knew that this was going to happen. Hey, we talked about this ahead of time. I know it's going to take you maybe a week or two as you do something different and practice new skills and habits to change. And I emphasize that word change because it's not easy. How many of us have tried to lose weight, change our money habits, anything in life? Change is not always easy. It's no different here. And as you show that support, this is what happens. It still will go, one will go down while the other one goes up, but now you're moving in a positive overall direction. And the reason why I call it doggy paddling to success is because in doggy paddling, you typically have one hand down while the other hand's up, and you keep moving them to keep your head above water. Well, we're not trying to keep our head above water. We're going to doggy paddle ourselves up to where the water keeps moving lower and lower. but it starts with you. It starts with me, and it starts with Dan as leaders. We have to be courageous and vulnerable enough to be okay with the short-term pain and support it and create a baseline of that support as somebody tries to change a behavior. Dan, where are you going to go next? I'll switch with you.
There's a lot on there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot to talk about.
Well, we have flight. What? I guess we have
Flight, firm, and fight.
Yeah. So we have fight, stand firm, or flight, as in either run away, right? Fight the problem or stand firm. And the things that we've been talking about with vulnerability is you want to make sure that when you are receiving some kind of either criticism or some kind of, I'm not even going to call it criticism, let's just call it shaming. Because at the end of the day, shame is a terrible thing, right? We can all agree with that, so I think that's the right vernacular to use in this setting. Because feedback can be good, and I don't want to somehow give the misunderstanding that we're hammering on feedback here. We're not. What we're hammering on is shaming. And it's the shame piece that I want to talk to. So when it comes to shame, okay, people can do one of two things. And this goes back to the fight or flight analogy, right? We generally either fight the situation, or we're going to go to war and we're going to combat it, i.e. Archie says something I don't like, I throw an insult at him, he throws an insult back, and then we just start going at it, right? Or there's the flight syndrome, which honestly, I hate to say this, but this is the one that I tend to do. When I don't like what's going on, I'll get very stoic, I'll become very quiet, I will let it just run on, and then I'm just like, I'm out. And that's the equivalent of running away from the issue. I will just step out and not even deal with it, okay? Or there's the right one, or the whole living one. It's the vulnerability one. So I wouldn't even call it right. I'm going to call it the vulnerability one. This is you embracing who you are. It's the stand tall one. And when we talk about standing tall or standing firm, in this case, right? Standing firm, it doesn't mean that you're a jerk, that you're immovable. So I'll make that very, very clear. I love Brene Brown's representation of it because there's two elements to standing firm according to her. The first is to have a soft front, which means that you're open to feedback. You're open to embrace your opportunities to learn and grow. You're open to these elements that you may not be in the right, that you may need to make adjustments to who you are, and you're embracive of that, and you're caring and you're understanding. However, soft front, and she refers to firm back, meaning that your spine, you stand tall, and the firm back element is you hold on to who you are, who the best of you is, which represents your value systems, who you are creatively, and everything that makes you, you, and whole living. So in other words, if I don't like something that Archie is saying, soft front, firm back would come out in a way like, hey Archie, can I talk to you for a couple of minutes? I've got a couple of things I want to kind of express to you. And then I would say, you really hurt my feelings when you said this, this, and this. Can you help me to understand what you were thinking or why you positioned it this way? And that would give him the opportunity to then respond to me. And then I could either take that and make adjustments or say, hey, you know what? I'd like to offer you a different way because it upset me. Maybe if I gave you this type of information. But I'm engaging him rather than him saying something that I don't like. And instead of being courageous and addressing the issue, I walk away, which is what I have a tendency to do and say, I'm not going to mess with this. I'm just going to try to hold it in or figure it out or do something else. And the problem with that and that thinking is I'm holding in negative energy. When I do that, and that negative energy stores up. It doesn't get released. So that stays in there, and that stays in there for as long as I can keep it in there until we have the issue again or he says something else that I choose not to address when it bothered me. And it adds up, and it adds up. So when we go back to thoughts, feelings, behaviors, results, there comes a certain point where that negative field in my feelings builds up to the point where I can't handle it anymore. I then explode and my behavior becomes extreme and I say all kinds of nasty and ugly things in that moment. What's the result? And if you're not careful, it can be disastrous. Yeah.
Boy, this really felt like in some instances we were reliving a conversation we had a little while ago.
I think we're reliving a few conversations that we've had.
This is much more enjoyable, though, and entertaining.
Yeah, it's funner to teach about it than actually address it and deal with it.
Yeah, it really is. You know what's funny, though, because you actually, again, led me into another one of my thoughts. I'm going to switch with you again. And if it's okay with you, are you okay if we wrap it up on this one?
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
We want to make sure that we're one of our commitments is staying impactful and just firmly being transparent. I think my energy is going to start going down here.
Yeah, that's
that whole flight, fight, firm response. There's another concept that's taught in a book. Thank you, Angela Metzger. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. Talks about there's two paths that you get to choose, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You either have a learner or you have a judger path. This is all about understanding and gaining more information, more insight. This is about making judgments, about statements. To me, when I think of judgment, I think of making a statement because you, at that point, have made up your mind and now you're just reacting to it. Again, back to Dan's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, results. Oh, well, I've learned everything I need to know.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and throw my behavior out there because I've made my judgment, which is now going to end in some type of a result. Usually not positive. The thing I really like to hold on to with this, you always have something which is a choice. You always get to choose, do you want to stay in learner mode or do you want to become or go into judger mode? And one of the concepts I've really been embracing the last probably, 3 years is probably, I'd say good, is people choose what they want. I don't choose it. I can help hold the mirror up and I can help with the honesty piece. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I just need to ask the right questions because I'm really not the person that's judging. When it comes to performance, the bar has already been established. You're going to have the result no matter where that's at. The other person really is the person that needs to make decisions and judgments. I'm just asking the right questions. But I really think the part that's important to think about or play in your mind here is, as leaders, all too often we find ourselves, I believe, and I feel like, in this judger mode. Oh, I have to make a call on this. It's all on me. Or, man, that person is, and then they'll add whatever adjective you want to it. When really the right question is, geez, how's so-and-so feeling today? I might want to go ask. Hey, that project didn't go quite how I thought it would. I wonder if I could do something to help him out. Maybe I should go ask some supportive questions.
And one of the things that you got to remember as a leader is often your experience, we rely so much on that because it's usually considered to be a tool that assists us, right? Because it's because of my experience, right, that I'm as good as I am. But your experience can also work against you, and it can work against you big time when you put it into judger mode. If you're not careful, you need to look at your experiences and realize that how diversified are those experiences? You may be really good with your experience within a small framework, but if that falls out of that framework and you misjudge your experience on how valuable it is, and you're basing human behavior on this set of rules when really it's operating over here, you can be dead set wrong, and that can really bite you. And I've seen that happen over and over again. I've done it. I
think we've all done it. I guess a really great way to put this just across is think about it this way. Do you think you learn more if you were in a room surrounded by people that you felt that you were superior to and you wanted to make judgments on them and you really didn't need to learn anything about them because, let's be honest, you're the smartest person in the room? Or, scenario number 2, you're probably the least smart person in the room in that particular area, as Dan mentioned, of expertise, but you ask a ton of questions. I would actually prefer that second scenario because I can promise I would learn a ton more than if I feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. And I think we can both comfortably say we've all been here. We've all felt like, I'm probably the smartest person in the room. What do I have to learn? And boy, do you usually end up learning the lesson in that room.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan, is there another concept that you're passionate about you want to teach tonight? Or?
I think we've hit saturation.
Okay.
At least for tonight. I think we're done. We can keep this up and do another one if you want.
Yeah, I feel like we got a lot of synergy on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's good. I guess we'll get the feedback and find out.
So here's the key. When we're thinking about vulnerability, and I know we've been on this subject for, probably like a month and a half now?
About a month, I think.
Somewhere
Well, yeah, but it's been pretty wide in terms of our scope.
Yeah, that's true, because we talked about personal,
We've
talked about business.
our business,
Now we're
and
talking
then
about what it's like in a work environment.
more kind of a corporate work environment. Right?
The bottom line is there's a lot of different ways to look at this. The key isn't that you look at it the same way we do, because it doesn't matter. The real important thing is that you find a way, shape, or form to come up with an identity, and really, as I think you said best, like find out what your story is and live your story. Because anytime you're living anything less than that, you're not being true to yourself, and you're sure not being as I don't know what the right even. I guess your peak performance. You're certainly not at your peak performance level. So don't fool yourself. Don't try to fool anybody else. Just be honest with it. And I think that's sometimes the hardest part for us is to recognize our limitations.
Your story is who you are. It's where are you and what are you doing when you're your most joyous and creative space. It's your subconscious. It's your hobbies. It's the things that you love to do. That is your joyous space. That's your whole living space. And that's what we're talking about. And that's why it's a threat to so many people, because all of a sudden, often your joy space, or the space that you really enjoy doing, it may be art, for example. I may love to be an artist, but you've heard all your life growing up, you can't be an artist, you can't make any money at it, you need to go out and work a real job, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and it's suppressing that creativity. So when we mention whole living, and we mention be the best of you and be who you are, that's what we're talking about. Embrace what makes you, you. Do you, as Gary Vaynerchuk refers it to.
Yeah, really, I guess in closing, my name's Archie Larson.
And I'm Dan Doolittle.
And just remember, if you're not living your own story, then it's just not worth it.
You're not living.
Yeah. All right. Have a great night, guys.
Good night.